This is the Drummers Resource Podcast, session 389. And the quote of the day is, "To live a creative life, we must lose our fear of being wrong." You're listening to the Drummers Resource Podcast, home of in-depth interviews with the world's greatest drummers, music industry professionals, and thought leaders. Inspiration, education, and motivation for drumming and beyond, and beyond, and beyond, and beyond. What's going on, everybody? Nick Ruffini here, and this is another episode of the Drummers Resource Podcast. I hope you're doing well, and I am extremely excited about this conversation today. And before we get into it, I want to remind you that you can go to drummersresource.com/mix, M-I-X, and sign up for Nick's Monday Mix. That is a email that I send out every Monday that has the latest podcast release, but it also has other things that I'm checking out that week, new music that I'm listening to, documentaries that I'm watching, anything that I think is cool and I think that you'll dig as well is in that Nick's Monday Mix. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff, sometimes there's a little, but every Monday you get an email and you can sign up for that. Just go to drummersresource.com/mix, M-I-X. And now the conversation. This is with Bill Bruford, and this conversation is a little different because we don't talk much about his backstory, and I'm going to fill you in briefly about his backstory. He's the original drummer for Yes. He was in Genesis, played for a super group called UK, played in King Crimson, and he's had a lot of interviews. So there's a ton of information that you can find out about him and about his career and all that sort of stuff. But he retired and has since gone into the psychology and gone into the academic side of drumming in creativity and understanding really how creativity works with the expert drummer. He has a new book. It's actually called Uncharted: Creativity and the Expert Drummer. So we talk about the path of creativity, and this is a really eye-opening conversation. It's a really inspiring conversation. It's a thought-provoking conversation, and I just cannot believe that I got Bill Bruford on the podcast. And this is an amazing conversation that you're probably going to want to grab a notebook, because I think you're going to want to take some notes. So if you want to find out more about him, I suggest Googling Bill and go to his website. You can read all about it. There's, like I said, there's a ton of interviews out there about him in terms of his playing and all that stuff. So this is a bit of a different interview, and I'm just extremely honored to have him. And without further ado, let's get into it with the legendary Bill Bruford. Bill Bruford, how are you today?
I'm doing just fine, in the miracle of science. I'm in the Surrey countryside in the UK, and you are in Los Angeles.
I'm in the Bay Area, so I'm
in the Bay Area.
Same thing though. It's still amazing science that we can chat all the way around the world. It's free, and most of the time it works. You know.
Yep, indeed.
Sometimes it gets a little wonky, but most of the time it works. First of all, I want to publicly thank you for doing this, for agreeing to do this. I know that you've done thousands of interviews throughout your career, and so we sort of talked beforehand. We don't need to go over your backstory, and maybe not everyone knows your entire backstory, but I will talk about that before we get into this interview, and they can look it up and they can find all that information, everything that you did with Yes, and King Crimson, and UK, and all that stuff.
Yep.
But now, you've taken a change in your career. You retired in 2000. What year did you retire? 2009. 2009. I kept thinking 2006. Retired.
Yeah, which means I haven't played drums really for 9 years now.
Which is amazing. And
it is.
But so why was it? Did you retired for performing publicly, but did you retire from playing? Like, or do you just not play at all?
I don't play at all. That's true. I played, pretty hard at it for 41 years. Mm-hmm. And, well, two things really I could say is that after 41 years of doing almost anything, almost anybody wants a change, I think. Uh-huh. And there are other things I wanted to do. And this seemed like a very appropriate time to do it. One of which was kind of step back out of performance and consider and reflect upon what performance was, and see if I could make any kind of a contribution to what drummers do to the understanding of creativity and performance in the drummer's world. Mm-hmm. So I think that was really what I wanted to do. It's just taken me rather a long time to have a look at that particular area, which is a huge area of thought and academia.
What happens when you wake up in the morning and you say, I want to play drums? Or does that never happen?
I don't. You got
Really?
to bear in mind, there are some people on this planet who don't actually say that.
I
But
agree.
I know. I do have a lot of difficulty explaining to people that to me it was perfectly okay to put down the drumsticks. I was all right with that. I really had said everything I wanted to say, perfectly seriously. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing: it took me a little while to figure out, because I'm asked this a lot. So how could I answer this in one sentence? And the best I can come up with is the reason I gave up drumming is because I couldn't hear what came next.
Explain that to me.
I don't mean the next bar of the music.
Sure.
I don't mean remembering music. I couldn't understand, and I've always felt I had a handle on the next styles, the next fashions, what the band could do, what the next tune could be, what my next part on my next tune would be, where my next move in the music industry would go. In other words, I sort of knew it all, but around 41 years, I couldn't see where I fitted into it. I couldn't hear what came next. And you can take that at the level of the musical phrase, if you like, or more importantly to me, really, the conceptual thinking on a drum kit.
Right. And where culturally, stylistically things were going, you were, I don't want to say confused, you were unsure of where you fit in with that. That's interesting.
Exactly so. I think part of it was a sense that so much has been done. Mm-hmm. Also, partly a sense that you'll get when you're 68 as well. Right. Which is the young guys are tremendous. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely great. And I have, I kind of look at the young guys and say, well, I don't really know how to add to that. Mm-hmm. You've got that nailed. You've got it covered. Where's the gap for a Bruford in here? Right. So that's the way I looked at it, and not everybody looks at drums the same way, but I wanted to find out what had made me stop. Mm-hmm. And in one sentence, it's because I couldn't hear what came next.
That makes sense. It's interesting that you mentioned the younger kids now, because even, I was born in 81, but in the late 80s, I feel like there just weren't players who were playing like some of the players are playing now in terms of the chops and in terms of just the raw speed and power behind the kit. Now, I think there were some players, but now it's almost like a sport now. Would you agree with that, or would you disagree with that?
I would, and I think there's a danger in that. I think it's a kind of aberrant behavior that somehow popular music is not really accommodating what it is that drummers can do. Drummers, therefore, have this strange behavioral pattern where they go off and play to other drummers. Right. Extremely fast and present to themselves what they can do, which is tremendous, but somehow they're becoming a bit disconnected from the idea of popular music performance. Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to say 40 years ago that a good drummer was, let's say Ringo Starr, he had the ear of the listening audience. Mm-hmm. So he and George Martin did things with drums, and they connected to a popular music audience who loved that. Now, I fear there's a gap between the stratospherically talented, thin, small cream on top of the drummer world and the large, large body of most drummers who provide pretty much what has already been done and already is expected. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that. It's an honorable piece of work, but it is a big gap between, it's clear blue water between the inventors and the kind of steady guys at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm hearing too, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like there's a lot of people who are learning all of these things that they're actually never going to be able to use. They'll never be able to use them in like you said, in popular music or on a record or for anything, because it's so stratospherically impressive, like you said, that there's just nowhere to put it.
Yeah, it doesn't register in the sort of popular music language. No one's really getting it, right? And it can't really be used in that context. So what then is of use to younger drummers? Well, maybe my book can contribute here in the sense of trying to figure out what it is that drummers do and why they do it typically, and how they can maybe even be happier doing it. Mm-hmm. And that's partly where creativity kicks in.
So do you think that it should be, because I don't think that you think it should be ignored. There should be some sort of, for lack of better words, chop development or technique, and you need all of these things as a means to an end, and you want to make sure that you have headroom in your playing. But where do you think the disconnect is happening? Where do you think that people are skewing too heavily on the, let's call it, the sport of drumming, and less heavily on the creativity side and the musicality side?
That's a difficult question. Where is the disjunction? I don't know. It's the audience sort of wants what it had yesterday, which is fine. And what it had yesterday generally is a very agreeable, 2 and 4 beat, or 4 beats to the bar, pretty straight ahead. Mm-hmm. And there is an enormous imperative upon record producers to produce that. And that is what drumming is. Drumming isn't anything other than that, really. And it's become very homogenized. In other words, when I was a kid, there were probably, if you analyzed, and I haven't done this work, but somebody right now will be doing it, top 10 chart hits, over the last 40 years or so, you would find a narrowing of metrical options. Mm-hmm. In my day, you learned a 6/8, even a 12/8, maybe something in 3/4. A 4/4 backbeat thing, and you were away. You had 3 or 4 things that you could play there. Mm-hmm. Now, even those things are rare. A 3/4 or a 6/8 is kind of rare, or a 12/8, a very slow 12/8 thing. Mm-hmm. Even those things are rare these days. So there's a kind of homogenization of tempo and of metrical stuff, and of sonic stuff, of the timbral stuff too, is also very homogenized now. Everything has to be kind of the same dynamic range.
Right.
A difficult world, in other words, for drummers to function in.
Sure. For some reason, it makes me think of when I remember watching an interview with you where you were saying that you felt like, even though that you were playing all these crazy time signatures, you felt like you were just playing rock. And you felt like you were a rock band. You were in a rock band, even though that you were playing all these different time signatures. And I recently had a conversation with, are you familiar with the band Fish?
A little bit.
Okay. A little bit. So John Fishman is their drummer, and we were talking about the idea of whether you're playing in different time signatures or whether you're playing a lot of intricate stuff, there still has to be that, what he called it is that snap. It still has to be implied, or it has to either be there or it has to be implied. But it has to have that snap. It has to have that pocket and that groove. Was that something that you were conscious of through your playing career, that whether you're playing, in 35/8 or whatever it is, were you conscious of, go ahead.
You'll be astonished to hear, really, that when I was a kid, we didn't talk about groove at all. Groove was an American word that came into my thinking, after I've been playing 5 or 6 years, in the mid-'70s somewhere, probably, with Picaro and some of those guys, I guess.
Right.
And some Steve Gadd stuff when we became aware of him. So we didn't start with that at all, really. In fact, I'm so old that, tempo was under the governance of the drummer, and if it needed to get a little bit faster, it did, and if it needed to slow up a bit, it did, because that made the music sound better. Mm-hmm. If that made the section, a kind of orchestral approach to time.
So there would be pushing and pulling within a tune, and that was totally fine.
Absolutely. And you wouldn't want to set a metronome through yeses close to the edge, even though the thing sold gazillions of records. It's not metronomic, and we never thought it should be. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of people who are still a bit uncomfortable with that whole idea of some sort of oscilloscopic prurience, some sort of computer-based perfection. Perfection not being a word that holds any interest for me.
Me neither. I always said they should take the word out of the dictionary because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it doesn't really figure in music, which is full of what they sometimes call participatory discrepancies. The scrapings and the bits and bobs in between people. My symbol isn't exactly with the bass player's thing, but it doesn't particularly matter because it has that particular feel to it that's nice.
Right.
I'm not sure how we got onto that, sorry.
No, I think that's...
We were just talking about groove, yeah, so that came later.
I think that commenting on what you said earlier about how things are not metronomically sound, and I'm obviously not the first person to say this, but it's a conversation, and sometimes the conversation gets heated, or sometimes you talk faster, or sometimes you talk slower, and it can be the same conversation, and the things can push and pull, and to me that's more organic, that's more natural, that is more impulsive and creative on the stage or in the studio or whatever it is. Yeah. And once you start stripping those things out, I mean, how fun would it be if you and I were sitting here having a conversation talking like robots?
Yeah, absolutely. Horrific.
Yeah. I mean, it may be horrific as it is listening to me talk, but if I sounded like a robot.
It's interesting, isn't it, how, we drummers, when the click and Roger Lynn's drum machine appeared in the mid-'70s, we suddenly learned to play in time, and then were given the most impossible drum parts to emulate. Could we play as well as the computer, only better? And then we learned how to do that, and lots of drummers are very, very good at that. And now programmers are learning how to sound like human beings.
Right.
So it's turned full circle. And the relationship between science and the human is an ever ongoing issue. Mm-hmm. And how drummers fit into that, how they may fit into it, and how they might make it work and might make it matter, and how they might make meaning out of both of those things is really the topic of my book.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think there is a place for both of that. I mean, for years you played with electronics, you played with acoustics, and putting those two things together, I think that there is definitely a place for that. As I'm guessing you do too, because you did it. But somehow maintaining that human element has always been paramount, I think.
Yeah, indeed. How does the individual fit into currently quite a difficult kind of drum culture or drum ecology or drum environment where drummers are supposed to do certain things, and they're very constrained by prior expectations of others. Mm-hmm. So, the guitarist expects you to do one thing, your mother-in-law expects you to do another thing, and the producer definitely wants you to do something else.
Right.
And somehow you're expected to fit into that without even saying, hey, I'd like to do it this way. Now, when I grew up, that's all I ever did. I only ever said to everybody else, hey, I think we should do it this way. Mm-hmm. Probably irritated the shit out of a lot of people. but no, that's what I thought creativity was. I thought it was interreacting with other guys and saying, well, I like that, but what about this? Mm-hmm. So I kind of thought that's what it was. And it took a while to figure out that not everybody wants that. Not everybody wants to be with people like that. And in fact, popular music creativity is not always welcome in popular music. It's not always necessary.
Right. There's a lot of yes men, so to speak.
Yeah.
And, you've been notorious for, well, I don't know if notorious is the right word, but you're well known for being not only a creative, but also speaking your mind about creativity and saying, no, this is the way that I think we should do it, or putting in your 2 cents to say, maybe we should try it this way, or let's try to modulate this, or whatever it is.
Yeah, indeed. And I think what I'm trying to do when I'm saying that is I'm trying to make the performance meaningful for myself.
Right.
Very selfish, actually.
Really?
I'm trying to figure out, what is the purpose of this? Mm-hmm. Anybody could do this. Why don't we do it that way? So we sound a little different, so that we contribute something. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing.
That's interesting that you say that it was being selfish, because I was going to ask, is it a matter of arguing the point because you want to be right, or you're arguing the point because you want it to be right for the music?
Well, that's a subtle distinction and a good one. I think, when I'm arguing that point, but it's been a while, mm-hmm. When I'm arguing that point, it's because I wanted it to work, the band and the music and the piece of music we're working on, to be as good as possible, to be as interesting as possible, mm-hmm. to have as many people in the band agree that it is as good as possible. I think that's it, really.
Right. But would you be willing to, and like you said, it's been a while since you've been in the situation, but would you have been willing to sort of take a back seat in your own, I don't want to say creativity, but maybe in the role of what you're playing in order to serve the greater good?
Yeah, yes, and I think that's what I did all the time.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, I was also giving myself great entertainment and enjoyment in pulling something together, recording it, sitting back, listening to it, and saying, "Yeah, that's good. That didn't exist yesterday. It exists now." Mm-hmm. It's great.
Right.
So I've had a great time at it, doing it, and I watch younger people today under these much stronger constraints, I think, of expectations mm-hmm. that we didn't have.
Right.
Nobody knew what the heck a progressive rock group was going to do.
Right.
And they didn't seem to mind. So long as we sold a few records, nobody seemed to mind.
Right. It blows my mind that there was such there was so much artistic freedom and you could do all these things in the studio and it was not cheap to record a record, and you could experiment and you could do all of these different things. Now we have, we have never ending file storage and we can make any edit that we want and we can change everything. And there's less and less and less creativity, but we have more tools to do it and it's a lot cheaper. We can do it for, pennies.
Yeah. Isn't that tricky? That's a real paradox, that.
It is.
And if you find the answer to that, put it on a postcard and send it to me in England. Because it's a very difficult paradox that we have more and more and more. Everybody can make a CD in his bedroom. And here's the problem. Everybody does make a CD in their bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have no critics. We have no value to the music because nobody pays for it. So it's not valued.
Right.
In that sense, it has it's less and less value in culture. So it's a difficult time.
Mm-hmm.
Difficult time, no doubt about it at all. And drummers, of course, are adapting and amending like they always do very well. And I know you're a massively competent player, but you also do drummers resource as well, right? So, I mean, everybody has two strings to their bow, and maybe that's what it'll be like in the future.
Sure. Now, obviously, the idea of music not being valuable is bad, but how do you feel about the idea that anyone can create a record and that anyone can, put something out to the world without going through the vetting process, without going through a record label or a quote unquote gatekeeper?
Yeah. For me, it makes life difficult. It's more of a challenge. How on earth does anybody ever get heard?
Right.
That's the good guys as well as the bad guys, or the guys who are not so good. How does anybody get heard? How does anybody form a relationship with anybody else when everybody else is in a band or a musician of some sort? Difficult, I think. Very hard. I'm a believer in relationships, musical relationships. The Jagger Richards, the Aretha, and King Curtis. Those kind of musical relationships. Finding a partner, I think, is a great idea. If you're a rhythmic specialist, maybe you should have a guy who's a harmonic specialist or something like that. And the two of you, bounce ideas. I like creative partnerships. I think they're great. And if I was starting at the beginning, I'd go to where the greatest density of musicians is, probably Manhattan or Berlin or somewhere. Certainly not where I am in the Surrey countryside. And I'd go and find someone in that greatest density of musicians, I think, and see what everybody's doing, and then look for little gaps that people have not covered or left uncovered, little stones under the rock people have left uncovered. But it's hard. I have no magic phrases, I'm afraid.
Right. And the idea of how, like you said, how do people get heard? There's so much information out there, but no one seems to be any smarter than they were 15 years ago, or you would think with the ubiquity of free information that everyone would be extremely intelligent, but I don't think the intelligence of people has gone up much.
I don't think it's gone down.
No, I don't think so either. But you would think that with all of this information, we would be able to, you can learn anything. I mean, you can learn anything. You can go online and learn anything for free, which is an amazing thing. But it just seems like, it's all information, but not a lot of substance, I guess.
I think what's partly missing in the education of young musicians, if there was anything missing, is that I think there's probably slightly, as we were saying earlier on, slightly too much precedence given to technical ability rather than the social stuff that goes on in bands. The getting on with people, the figuring out what's required, but figuring out what the other guy needs,
right,
to make his life great. And of course, that's the great thing. You supply what the other person needs. But even, it can take you a few years in the business before you even figure that out.
Right.
And that should be rule number one, often in music making. And your Daniel Glass, is it? I think was talking. I was just listening before you gave me the call. And he was talking a little bit about how musicians work in bands and how drummers should fit in and what band leaders want and what it's like being a sideman. I mean, that stuff is golden,
right? In
the sense that young people need to know that, and I don't think they do. Generally, they're kind of stadium ready, which is a great phrase I heard the other day. You know what I mean? So a 19-year-old guy picks up the sticks and knocks out the beat, and then the next day he gets a call and he's in Madison Square Gardens, 20,000 seats, doing the same thing pretty much, and he just missed out a kind of whole lifetime of musical experience. He therefore has very little to draw on or fall back on should the stadium band fall through, or he needs a new gig of some sort.
Or even when he gets that gig, having the interpersonal skills to deal with that.
Indeed, absolutely. Yeah, the sort of the calmness when things go a bit haywire.
Right. It reminds me of these young, when a young athlete gets to play soccer or football or whatever it be, and they don't know how to handle it. They get on this big stage and they get millions of dollars, but they haven't, and professional athletes in the United States go through classes where how to deal with money, how to deal with fame, how to deal with, friendships and relationships and all of that sort of stuff. And coincidentally, I went to music school and didn't learn any of that stuff and switched from music to business with a music performance minor. And I learned all of that stuff in business school. I learned
that's very interesting. Yeah.
How to deal with people, how to have a conversation, how to get your point across, how to, and that none of that stuff gets taught in music school, which blows my mind. That's like, I think and forgive me, I'm rambling here, but I think that playing is a given. You have to be able to play. So everyone has to play, or everyone can play at that level. And so the differentiator is your attitude, how you deal with people, interpersonal skills, all of these other things. But no one talks about that.
True. And I think you could ramp that up in any kind of music education, because being in one of these top level bands, a really creative band, is a really fine kind of example of intrapersonal, human communication skill, and making it work and being able to derive satisfaction for all parties in this thing is really good. So, I mean, if you're in the Miles Davis, creative groups of the 1960s, late 1960s, the Miles Davis quintets or something, a phenomenally kind of gifted group of people, 4 or 5 people, mostly, sometimes sextet, I think, operating on such an incredibly high level of kind of give and take and human interaction. And, they often say, well, if the British government operated at such a high level of interaction, so to take that example of the Miles Davis groups, that's an exemplar of creative interactivity and developing things and giving and taking all at the same time while on the spur of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we need more of that, and the guys with those skills will flourish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of the idea of what I think of like working out with someone who's stronger than you, and you get stronger too. It's sort of bringing everyone along with you, and that constant interaction with people, and sort of the mentoring and those types of things.
Yes, yeah.
That all play into fostering better musicians or whatever it be. It could be outside of music to get all together.
Well,
maybe the United States should take some of that. The government. The government should be doing the same thing here. So,
I was just at a conference the other day about music education. Creative learning and creative teaching or creative teaching of creative learning, something like that. The title of the conference, and they were just saying there is quite a bit of work now being done on creativity in musical groups. Mm-hmm. And, teachers and educators are not certain how to go about this. But just one quick, obvious overview is that a musician should be thrown in a room with other musicians. That musician should lead those other musicians for 2 days and produce a piece of music. Mm-hmm. On days 3 and 4, that musician should be thrown in the room with other musicians and say nothing and receive only instruction from an alternative leader. Feel what it's like under direction. Complete direction from another leader. Days 5 and 6, the same musician be thrown in the same room and invent parts while others are inventing parts. In other words, you are collaborative creativity.
Right.
So, I mean, right there's three levels of human interaction.
Sure.
Entirely different. And even though that sounds to you and me very simple, straightforward stuff and sort of thing that musicians often do, in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. To younger players, I think they don't understand that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the idea you have to lead, you have to be led, and you have to be able to work with other people.
Yes, you said it so much more succinctly than I did.
Well, I took some notes while you were talking. So, but it's, not to go into the business side of things again, but that's how business is run. That's what you learn in business school. You learn all of these things that you need to learn how to be a leader. You need to learn how to manage people. You need to be able to work with people. There's no difference between that and music, I don't think, except that music is highly creative. but all of the building blocks and the concepts to me are the same. And I think that when people start to hear that stuff, and I would love to get your opinion on it, it sort of sterilizes the creativity a little bit, or they get scared that it will sterilize the creativity a little bit if you start looking at it that way or putting it in boxes almost.
Well, I guess there's a very small undertow of people who think somehow that if you examine something, it'll go away. Mm-hmm. Is that what you mean? I don't want to be taught the drums because it's, it'll endanger my sound or something. That is
an interesting thing. I've had students tell me before that they don't want to learn rudiments or they don't want to learn from books or anything like that because it's going to, they're a creative and they don't want to ruin that.
I don't know what evidence they have for that.
I don't know either.
But there isn't really much. They need to learn to change. That being a musician, and particularly a creative one, involves constant change. So whoever you were, on Monday, you're going to be a different kind of guy by the time you get to Wednesday.
Right.
And change is fast. So adaptability, of course, but these are the great human skills, that work in any organization and without which any organization is dead on the rocks.
Right. Yep.
So I think we're all agreed here that improved human skills, interactive skills are hugely important.
Yes.
And some sense of where you're going, some sense of where you derive meaning from your playing. What are your red lines in the sand? Are there things that you're not prepared to do, or things that you love to do, or how good at you are being in a situation in which for sure that you haven't a clue how to do this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very good thing for every musician to be. And I think twice a year, and it probably happened to me, I would imagine twice a year, I looked down at my drumsticks and I knew for sure I hadn't a clue how to play this thing. And somehow you get through somehow. It's not as bad to other people as you think it is.
Mm-hmm. It's such an important part of growth. I would never want to feel comfortable all the time.
Oh, no. Yeah. I think a degree of uncomfortability comes with the artistic endeavor.
Do you know why when you tune a drum, you're supposed to go diagonal across the drum? That's because your drum is flawed. I hate to break it to you, but your drum is flawed because of the way that the edge is. The typical edge doesn't allow. Now let's get back into it with Bill Bruford.
I want to switch and I want to talk about this book specifically. Because I have some questions about it. So when you first set out to leave drumming, get into academia, did you plan on, was this book always at the forefront of the mind, or was this something that came as you started studying and as you started learning?
It's all sheer vanity, really. I'd had an autobiography which was pretty popular. Mm-hmm. It turned a lot of heads, and it was just called an autobiography. Very dull. And that came out around 2009. So after 18 months of some quite nice things going on with that, and I'd enjoyed the process, and I had really no idea what an academic book looked like. I kind of, and I said it in the book, I was offered an honorary degree at the local university. Mm-hmm. And I said to them, well, that's quite nice, but actually I've got a few questions. And the first question is, why did I stop playing? I told you earlier on, I finally figured out the answer to that. I said, I wonder if I could come to your university and kind of look around this topic of creative music performance. And in fact, perhaps performance psychology. So, my book is somewhere at the intersection of creativity and creative and performance psychology, those kind of areas. Could I come in? And so they said yes. And I started investigating and burrowing around. And then could I maybe do a degree in this? A doctoral degree, and they said, yes, but you're going to have to get some research done. You're going to have to learn how to become a researcher. You're going to have to get some research, bring the new research to your work, and tell us all about it. That's how it works. So I said, well, what can I bring? And, it became fairly apparent that what I had is something that a sort of magic word in research, which is access. So if you want to do a book on, say, what's it like being an American president, you're going to need access to 10 or so of the last 10 presidents that are available, as it were. Mm-hmm. And if you do have that high-level access, it can be, you can produce fantastic work.
Right.
And most musical research is done on students, down the corridor from the professor. Why? Because they're convenient. They're down the corridor from the professor and or young professionals. And I had access to top-level guys who were working peak performance people. And I thought, well, I'll ask them what, their perceptions of creativity and how, of course, off the back of that comes a lot of stuff about how you work with others. And this stuff we've been talking about, intrapersonal skills. So that gave me a whole body of information from which to draw some conclusions and, to draw some patterns, to find some patterns and then draw some conclusions.
And I remember when you emailed me, you said that you had sat down and interviewed a lot of people: Cindy Blackman, Peter Erskine, Martin France, Mark Juliana, Dylan Howe. What were some of the things that you uncovered that you didn't expect to uncover when talking to these people?
Well, I'm not sure I was expecting anything particularly. That's another thing you have to do, is leave any preconceptions and expectations aside. But I think now that I'm out of that particular world of doctoral scientific investigation, I can say that some ideas, I guess, and hunches were kind of confirmed. I think drummers are a lot more creative than they think they are, although they don't pursue creativity as an end in itself. They want to make things work, and they find in the making things work for other people a creativity. They're very, very powerful people on stage, and they know that, but it's a kind of covert power. Nobody tells anybody, but we know, you and I know, the drummer can ruin everything, and the drummer can make it great.
I've done that multiple times.
And of course, these days, you hear so much damn drumming, because it starts at the beginning of any audio clip, more or less ends at the end. If it's popular music and there's a drummer involved, the drummer tends to play throughout, generally speaking. And as the harmony and melody is stripped back, and you're left with the rhythm of the words and the rhythm of the drums. I mean, the drums are a seriously potent instrument right now. And yet, drummers position themselves and are positioned as kind of a breed apart and a breed below. They, there's the old drummer's joke. And now, why is that the case? And so my book goes into that in some depth, I think.
And just to scratch the surface, why is that? Is it because it's not a melodic instrument, or is it because...
Yeah, I'd say that's it. Yeah, there's a pitched instrument bias, which you can perfectly easily trace through history. The old association of drummers and noise is very old. And so drummers are the lowest of a species, not quite musicians, as it were.
Right.
In fact, the other day somebody came into my room and gave me, do you have children?
Do I have children? I do not, no.
Yeah, okay. Well, there's a guy called Roger Hargreaves who writes a whole bunch of kids' books called Mr. Men. And there's Mr. Plumber, there's Mr. kind of booking agent, Mr. Taxi Driver, and so forth. And there's, of course, Mr. Noisy. And who is Mr. Noisy? Inevitably, he's a drummer. See, so that you see how this gets passed to the next generation, that they're not quite drummers. So drummers live in a drum culture, and that culture has a psychology, and it's a very negative kind of psychology, which drummers have to be aware of. What I'm saying is, be aware of these things, then you'll figure out how you're reasoning, and how other people are imputing things to you, and why they expect certain things of you. Generally, they don't expect very much, and guess what? They don't get very much.
Right.
Generally, a producer says, just do that nice 2 and 4 beat that we always like, right? And the guy says, sure, I'll do that. Not much is expected. He does it beautifully. A machine also could have done it beautifully, because at that level, a computer is, can easily replicate the human. So that's part of where we're at with this.
And how do we, as drummers, change that internally? That mindset or that negative?
I think a good start is to be aware of it. I think a good start is to be aware of why you are positioned the way you are, and what it is that people are expecting of you, and why they're expecting it, and how that could be changed. Unless we are all going to become band leaders, and indeed I did do that specifically to control some of these wild elements about what may or may not be expected, which is a luxurious position. Very few drummers are permitted to become drum leaders, as it were, and run their own ships. Although, interestingly enough, my 9 participants all do that. And that was one of their criteria for being considered expert drummers is that they have produced music of their own in some sort of CD form for public consumption on the grounds. That's why they're experts. And they are all band leaders, except one, and I needed one to be just a studio guy, because there are guys who don't pursue a solo career at all. Why? Because they want to be studio guys. So it's perfectly straightforward. I didn't want to exclude that as a group of musicians. So I have a classically representative studio guy who just not interested in anything else other than that.
Sure.
So that's yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, nothing else.
I didn't, at looking through that list of the people who you've interviewed, I didn't think about that until right now, about that. Oh, they're all band leaders. And a lot of them have been sidemen. A lot of sidemen or women they've done studio work, they've done session work and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, they're all band leaders as well. It's interesting. Yeah.
And even in just saying that, you've put a finger on a good point, which is that by mid-career and peak performance, you will have done all of that. Mm-hmm. There's almost no way, if you want to become an expert, there's almost no way you will have avoided any of that.
Right.
So you will have been the worst sideman in the world, as I have been in my day, and go on up, hopefully, to learning from that, to learning what it is that you are about as a creator and how best to bring it about under your own musical guidance.
This is something that's sort of stirring in me now that you're bringing this up, that I didn't really think about. 2 major bands that I played in my life, I started the first one, and the second one was my own solo project. And, but there was another, I did the sideman thing for 7 years. I never really enjoyed it because I never really felt like I had ownership, not from a business standpoint, but I just never felt that connected to it. And I think about that now, like I would never want to go on some huge pop tour because I would feel like I was almost on mute and I'm not contributing to really what's going on. And it's interesting because now having this conversation with you, I'm thinking about that. Like, yeah, I never really enjoyed being a sideman. It's not.
Well, there you found that out then.
Yeah.
And that's all you need to do, is to find out where you're positioning yourself relative to others in this music making thing. Mm-hmm. And that makes it a lot easier for others to be around. For you to be around others. It makes it easier for others to work with you. Right. Oh, this is the guy who does this very well. He's no good at that. Don't even think about asking him that. But this is, this is the guy, this is the Nick that we want, as it were.
Right.
And that helps, but there will be bumps along the way, inevitably.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'd rather stay home than go be a sideman. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's me. So
yeah.
If I run through these chapters real quick, can you give me, a sentence or two to sort of summarize them?
Ooh, that's a horrible job to do.
Think we can do it?
A sentence or two to summarize them. Well, go on, yes. Okay. All right. I'll try and put some context on it anyway.
Or just add some context, because this book, like I said, I'm a very slow reader. So I've been reading through it and I can't put it down. And so I think this book is important for every single drummer to read. And so I want to build some context around the book.
Well, that's nice of you to say that. And it's also unusual because a book of this depth has not been offered to drummers before. But another way of looking at this, and I recommend this, is that you go to the index. You find something that intrigues you, like Pete Erskine, Creativity in Jazz, or something. Mm-hmm. You look up those pages and read those pages.
Oh, so you can bounce around, you're saying?
A lot, yeah. You don't have to, you don't have to start at the beginning. This is not a storybook.
Right,
It's an academic book, and so there will be topics in it that appeal to you and others that don't. But go ahead, you were going to ask me about some chapters.
All right, so action and experience.
Oh, action and experience. Well, crikey, we are what we do. I don't really care what you tell me about your drumming. I care how you drum. And like any organism in the environment, you drum, you will get a reaction. That reaction becomes your experience. And that feeds into the next time you act. Is in creative action. I can't do activity theory, action theory for you even more simply in a podcast.
Right.
So creative performance is seen as significant action.
Right. Sinton Roach, 2 modes of performance.
Well, again, you're difficult. You're asking me to do a lot for you here. Sinton Roach. One way of looking at performance is, and I developed the idea of two modes of performance. One is functional, one is compositional. Functional is, broadly speaking, very broadly speaking, the idea of making something go well or go better. Compositional performance, very broadly speaking, implies doing something differently. So on the one hand, you've got doing something well or better. On the other hand, doing something differently, seeking to be different. Creativity is in here somewhere. On the one hand, Blair Sinter is a good. Do you know Blair Sinter, as a matter of fact?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know you know. You know him personally?
I do. Yeah, and I've had him on the podcast as well.
Okay, great. Well, Blair's a very good studio musician, and I use him as an example of some very good creative functional drumming under direction. Mm-hmm. At the other end of the scale, you might say Roach is a reasonable enough example of high-level creative compositional drumming. So there's a distinction between many people who are good at and operate under various degrees of direction on a continuum of control. They have some control, not all control, almost no control at all.
Right.
In fact, if you go to a tribute band whose only job is to exactly emulate the drummer of another band, you know the Australian Pink Floyd, for example? There's a guy called Paul Bonney playing the drums. His job is to absolutely avoid creativity. Nothing wrong with that at all. And bear in mind, none of this is pejorative. I'm not saying any of this is good, bad, or indifferent.
Sure.
And whether I like it or not, it's got nothing to do with it. So Paul Bonney would probably avoid creativity. Blair is, in the example I give, very creative in a functional sense. Max in a compositional sense.
Makes total sense. We'll do one more.
well, really, there's four. I mean, just to preempt you, the book is kind of posited on the idea that for something creative to happen, four things need to be in place. One is you've got to select something. You've got to choose something. All art involves some kind of selection. Having selected it, you've got to differentiate it. You've got to make it different from the other guy in some way. Having done that, you've got to communicate it to someone and have it assessed as being creative. So there's kind of SDCA model in all this. And the four chapters that come up next, one is about focuses on selection, one focuses on making things different, one focuses on communicating things, and one focuses on why and how and what is being assessed and for whom is it being assessed. So that's the broad skeleton of the book in about 3 sentences.
See, that was a lot easier.
Oh, God.
You're off the hot seat.
It's okay, but it's hard to do.
Of course,
and be entertaining in a podcast.
Right. So the book is called Uncharted: Creativity and the Expert Drummer. It is out now from the University of Michigan Press, and you can get it on Amazon and all around the interwebs. And I have this copy of it that I want to thank you again for sending to me. Like I said, I can't put it down, and I'm a slow reader, so I'll get through it.
Take your time. It's not all beer and Skittles. It's a tricky book,
right?
And I learned a lot in doing it, of course. And I'm currently doing some lectures around in the United States, funnily enough, on the topic.
Oh, are you?
So maybe I'll see some of you guys around. Not the West Coast, though.
Okay.
I'm only doing the kind of university corridor due west of Boston. So, I'm in Syracuse and Rochester and Buffalo and out to Cleveland and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and stuff. And if you want to know where those dates are, they're coming up in April 8th to 18th, I think, and about 10 or a dozen, and they are available at billbruford.com.
And I will link up to that. I make show notes for every podcast, so I will link up to that so that people
I appreciate
can
that.
find that as well.
Yeah, some of them are not available to the public anyway because they're institutions,
Okay. Amazing. Bill Bruford, thank you so much for, 1, your contribution to the drumming world all of these years, 2, for taking the time to chat with me, and 3, getting this book in my hands, which I think is amazing, and I can't wait to finish it.
Well, you're very kind, Nick, and I recommend that. What do I recommend? I don't recommend anything. I'm just sort of trying to make a contribution, really. I've always wanted to make a contribution to drummers. I like drummers. I'm not really very interested in rock or jazz or any other kind of genre, but I am interested in how drums are used in these genres.
That's an interesting take
my
on
interest
it.
My interest really is in drums and drummers and why they do the drumming that they do,
right?
Rather than anything specific to do with jazz or pop or rock, anything.
Well, contribution you have made, sir.
You're very kind.
And again, thank you for your time. Thank you for everything that you've done. And hopefully, I don't know, maybe I'm originally from the East Coast, so maybe I'll catch you at one of these, one of the lectures that you're doing as well.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, Bill, thank you again.
Pleasure, Nick. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. There you have it. That was the legendary Bill Bruford, and that to me, that conversation blew my mind. And when I got done the conversation with him, I was completely blown away, and it has resonated with me ever since. So I hope that you got a lot of value out of that. I hope that you really enjoyed it. For all the notes for everything that we talk about, you can go to the show notes, and that is at drummersresource.com/session 389. And do me a favor, if you get value from this podcast, if you like it, if it has changed the way that you approach your playing, if it has changed your mindset at all, if it does anything for you, all I ask is that you share it and you leave a rating review on iTunes. That really helps get the podcast out there to everyone else, lets people know about it, and that way more people can get turned on to it and we can hit more people with all of these great conversations. So if you can do that, share it, leave a rating and review on iTunes. I would truly appreciate it. And until the next podcast, keep drumming. Thank you so much for listening. I do appreciate it. I hope you dug this as much as I dug it. And I'll be talking to you soon. Peace.